The competition was approaching, and with it an air of expectation. It was a time of high pressure, not only for the participants but for the audience too. Everyone knew it would be a grand event, filled with talented performers from all over the region. It wasn't just about showcasing skill, it was about making a mark, earning respect, and showing the world who you were through music. For one pianist, the thought of this competition was overwhelming. She had never been one to seek attention, and the thought of performing on such a grand stage made her feel small. She preferred the quiet comfort of her practice room, surrounded by the sound of the keys and the melody that only she could understand. But there was no backing out now. This was her moment. The young pianist had always been passionate about music, but her journey had never been straightforward. She didn't come from a family of musicians. She wasn't surrounded by constant encouragement or financial support. It was her own determination that had gotten her this far. Her love for the piano had started when she was young, watching an old neighbor play tunes that filled the house with beautiful sounds. Over time, the piano became her world. But now, at the age of 21, she was faced with the biggest challenge of her life. The night of the competition arrived, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The auditorium was packed with an audience of eager music lovers, judges, and fellow performers. Her heart raced and her palms were sweaty. She stood backstage, nervously looking over the sheet music she had been given. It was a simple piece, one that would test her technical skill rather than creativity. Still, she wasn't sure what to expect. The piece was simple, yes, but it had a way of revealing everything about the player, their precision, their discipline, and their ability to stay calm under pressure. It was her turn to take the stage, and she felt a tight knot of nervousness in her stomach as she made her way to the grand piano. She could hear the audience murmuring in anticipation, and she tried to focus on the music. The judges were seated at the front, their eyes fixed on her, waiting to see what she could do. Her fingers brushed the cool surface of the piano keys as she settled in her seat. The spotlight hit her, and the moment of truth arrived. The sheet of music in front of her seemed simple enough. It wasn't an intricate, complex piece like some of the other performers had chosen. In fact, it was something that many considered to be an easy test, a melody that any competent pianist could play. She could already feel the judgment of the audience, who were likely expecting nothing more than a decent performance. It wasn't a piece that would wow anyone. Still, she knew this was her chance to prove herself. The judges handed her the music and gestured for her to begin. They had given her something they thought would be a safe option, something straightforward and easy. She glanced down at the piece. Nothing too difficult, but it was the kind of melody that tested one's ability to follow instructions and play technically. Her mind raced. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This wasn't the time to show off or take risks, she thought. She had to play this piece perfectly. The last thing she wanted was to mess up in front of an audience that was scrutinizing every note. With her fingers poised above the keys, she started to play. At first, it was just as expected. The melody was simple, the rhythm steady, and the notes familiar. It was one of those pieces that, once learned, could be played on autopilot. But she wasn't interested in just playing the notes. As her fingers moved, she felt a small spark of inspiration. The piece wasn't much, but maybe she could make it something more. Maybe she could infuse it with something, some emotion, some personal touch, that would give it life. As she played, the tempo began to shift. It wasn't intentional at first. Her fingers seemed to have a mind of their own, guiding the music in a direction she hadn't planned. The sound of the piano filled the air, more vibrant than she had expected. The simple melody she had been told to play started to breathe on its own. The judges seemed surprised. They exchanged looks, but she was too immersed in the music to notice. The tempo continued to evolve, and the quiet notes began to gain strength. The melody took on a life of its own, the simple chords weaving together into something more intricate. Her fingers danced over the keys with precision, yet there was a fluidity to her playing that made it feel like the music was flowing naturally, almost as if it were coming from somewhere deep within her. For a moment, she lost herself in the music. The audience was still, silent, but she could sense their attention. She could feel them leaning in as though waiting to see what she would do next. The notes she played felt like an expression of her own emotions, ones she had never been able to articulate in words. As she continued, she began to trust the music more and more. The initial nerves that had plagued her were slowly dissipating, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. This wasn't about playing a simple melody to meet expectations. It was about letting the music take her somewhere new, somewhere unexpected. She didn't need to be flashy or showy. She simply needed to let herself be vulnerable and authentic in her playing. Her fingers moved with greater fluidity, her body swaying gently to the rhythm of the music. The melody was still familiar, but it had been transformed. What had started as a simple test had now become a personal journey, a journey that the audience could feel. Each note seemed to tell a story, each chord built upon the last, in a way that made the music resonate deeply with the listeners. She knew she was taking risks, but it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about the judges or the audience, it was about the music, and she was determined to let it speak for itself. The sound of the piano echoed through the room, and for a moment, she felt like she was no longer just a young performer in a competition. She was a musician, an artist, fully immersed in her craft. The last few notes of the piece were approaching, and she felt a sense of completeness. She had taken a simple melody, something that could have been forgotten as soon as it was finished, and turned it into something more. The music had been transformed under her hands. The audience, though still silent, seemed to feel it too. There was a quiet energy in the air, an unspoken connection between the performer and the listeners. She played the final note, and the room remained still for a moment. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on longer than it should have. Then, without warning, the applause erupted. The sound of clapping hands filled the space, and she couldn't help but smile. She had done it. She had taken something simple and turned it into something unforgettable. She had moved them, even if she hadn't known how. She sat there, her fingers still resting on the keys, and let the applause wash over her. The judges were looking at her in disbelief. They had expected a straightforward performance, but what they had witnessed was much more. The simple melody had become something that left an impression. They hadn't seen it coming, and neither had she. Her heart was pounding, but she was filled with a quiet sense of pride. She had done more than just play a piece of music. She had let herself be seen, and in doing so she had captivated an entire room. The pressure had melted away, replaced by something pure and simple, the joy of music. The applause still echoed in her ears as she stepped off the stage. It was a surreal moment, one that she would replay in her mind for years to come. She had done it. She had played not just the piece of music in front of her, but something deeper, something that connected with the audience in a way she had never expected. The nerves that had plagued her before had completely disappeared, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. As she walked backstage, her thoughts were still swirling. She hadn't been thinking about the judges or the competition at all while she played. It was like the music had taken over, and she had simply let it guide her. And in doing so, she had made the melody her own. But as the applause began to fade, she couldn't help but wonder what came next. Was she truly ready for what this moment could mean? The competition was far from over, and she had no idea where she would place or how her performance would be received by the other judges. But one thing was clear. She had given it everything. She had put herself into the music, and she was proud of that. Backstage, a few of the other contestants were gathered, waiting for their turn. Some were chatting nervously, others pacing, but she didn't feel the need to join them. She took a seat in the corner, allowing herself to breathe. It had been a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anxiety, excitement, and finally, relief. She had done something she had never thought possible. She had played a piece of music in a way that felt like a personal expression. As the next contestant walked on stage, the room fell into silence again. Her hands still tingled from the performance, but she had already started thinking ahead. What had she learned from this experience? It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about connecting with the music in a way that was authentic. The audience had felt it, and so had she. The experience had taught her something important. Music wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about letting the music move through you and sharing your own emotions. The competition continued through the afternoon, but she was no longer focused on the other performances. She had already given everything she had, and the rest was out of her hands. As the final contestant took the stage, she found herself reflecting on her journey. She had started out in a small town, playing in her bedroom for hours every day. She had never expected to be here, competing on such a grand stage. There had been many times when she had doubted herself, when she felt like giving up. But she had kept going, practicing every day, improving bit by bit. And now, here she was, having just played one of the most memorable performances of her life. Despite the nervousness and uncertainty, she had proven to herself that she could rise to the occasion. She had shown that it wasn't about the complexity of the music, but about how deeply you could connect with it. She didn't need to be the flashiest pianist or play the most difficult pieces. All she had to do was be herself and let the music speak for her. The final performance came to an end, and the judges began their deliberations. She tried not to focus on it, but the tension in the room was thick. Everyone was waiting to hear the results. Her heart beat faster as the judges took their seats and began to speak. The first judge cleared their throat and began speaking. This competition has been a display of incredible talent, but there is one performance that stands out. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was she the one they were talking about? She didn't want to get her hopes up, but the word "stands out" sent a thrill through her. The second judge chimed in. It's not just about technical ability. It's about how the music is conveyed, how it resonates with the listener. And there was one performer who did that in a way we've rarely seen. The third judge nodded in agreement. Yes, it's not just about the notes on the page. It's about emotion, about telling a story through the music. And that's exactly what we saw tonight. The pianist held her breath. The room felt impossibly still. Every second felt like an eternity. The tension was unbearable, and all she could think about was the music she had played. Had it truly made that much of an impact? The judges continued to speak, but she was no longer listening. Her mind was racing, replaying the moment on stage, the way the music had flowed through her fingers. She had felt something in that moment, a connection to the piece and to the audience. Could that be what had made the difference? Finally, the head judge turned to the audience and spoke. And the winner of this year's competition is the pianist who performed the simple melody, transforming it into something extraordinary. Her heart skipped a beat. She could hardly believe it. It felt like a dream. The applause that followed was deafening, and she could barely comprehend what had just happened. She had won. She had done the impossible. The simple melody she had been given had turned into something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. As she stood to accept the award, a wave of emotions hit her. Gratitude, disbelief, and above all, a sense of fulfillment. She had worked so hard for this moment, and now it was here. She took the stage again, her legs trembling slightly, but this time it was different. The applause wasn't just for her performance. It was for the journey she had taken, the risks she had taken, and the way she had shared her heart through the music. The trophy felt heavy in her hands, but it wasn't the shiny award that mattered. It was the music, the feeling that she had created something meaningful that had made this moment unforgettable. And as the applause continued, she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more competitions, more performances, and more challenges ahead. But now she knew what it meant to truly connect with the music, and that was something no competition could ever take away. The next few days after the competition felt like a whirlwind. The excitement and attention from winning were overwhelming, but also exhilarating. People were reaching out to her from all over, asking for interviews, offering opportunities to perform, and congratulating her for the transformation she had brought to the simple melody. It felt surreal. Just a few weeks ago, she had been nervously preparing for the competition, uncertain of what her future would look like. Now, everything had changed. She had always been passionate about music, but winning had given her a new sense of purpose. No longer was she just a student playing in the shadows of more accomplished musicians. She was a performer in her own right, with a voice that had been heard by thousands. But with this new recognition came a pressure she hadn't fully anticipated. The expectations were higher now. She felt as if she had to prove herself again and again. Her phone buzzed nonstop, filled with messages of congratulations and offers. One of the most exciting messages came from a renowned music school in another city. They had seen her performance and were offering her a scholarship. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of but never dared to believe was possible. The pressure was mounting, but it also filled her with an undeniable excitement. Could she really take the next step in her musical journey? Still, the thought of leaving her small town, her family, and the place she had always known was daunting. She loved her quiet life, the simple pleasure of playing in her practice room, the comfort of being with people who knew her well. But the world was opening up to her in ways she had never imagined. The scholarship wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge. It was a chance to push herself further than she had ever gone before. She spent hours thinking about it, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, she made the decision. She would go. The music had always been her calling, and if she didn't seize this moment, she might regret it forever. She accepted the scholarship and began to prepare for the next chapter of her life. It was a huge leap, but one that felt necessary for her growth as a musician. The transition wasn't easy. Moving to a new city meant leaving behind everything that had been familiar to her. She felt a mixture of excitement and homesickness. The music school was prestigious, filled with talented and experienced musicians. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this level of competition, but the thought of not challenging herself kept her up at night. Her first day at the school was overwhelming. The halls were filled with students from all over the world, each one a brilliant musician in their own right. She felt like an outsider at first, unsure of where she fit in. The professors were demanding, constantly pushing her to do more, to be better, to perfect every note. It was a level of intensity she had never experienced before, but as time went on, she began to adapt. The pressure didn't go away, but she learned how to manage it. She worked harder than ever, practicing for hours every day, trying to push past her limits, and in that process, something amazing started to happen. She was starting to find her voice, not just as a pianist, but as an artist. She was learning how to express herself through her music in a way she had never been able to before. There were days when she doubted herself, when the weight of expectations felt too heavy to bear, but she had come too far to give up. She remembered the simple melody that had changed her life. She remembered how she had played it not just with her fingers, but with her heart. That was the key. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about impressing the judges or proving herself to anyone. It was about the music and the emotions it could convey. That was her true strength. She didn't need to follow the traditional path to success. She just needed to follow the music. And so she played. She played with all her heart, losing herself in the melody. The music wasn't just a series of notes anymore. It was a story, a conversation between her and the audience. When she finished, she felt a sense of peace. The peace wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had found the courage to let go of her fear and play from the heart, and that, she realized, was more important than any competition or award. As the months passed, her confidence grew. She became more comfortable with her own musical voice, less concerned with how others might perceive her. She began to take risks in her performances, adding her own unique twist to each piece she played. The professors took notice, praising her for her originality and emotional depth. She wasn't just another pianist playing technically flawless music. She was someone who could move an audience, who could make them feel something beyond the notes. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, one of her professors approached her with a smile. "You've grown so much," they said. "You're no longer just playing the music. You're living it." It was a compliment that meant the world to her. She had come a long way from the nervous pianist who had walked into the competition months earlier. She had found her confidence, her voice, and her purpose. And most importantly, she had discovered what it meant to truly connect with the music. Her journey was far from over, but she knew now that she had everything she needed to succeed. The lessons she had learned through the competition, through the challenges at music school, and through her own personal growth had shaped her into a better artist and a more confident person. She was ready to take on whatever came next, and so she continued to play, each note resonating with the knowledge that she was not just a performer, but a true artist, with a story to tell. She had started with a simple melody, but it had led her to a place where she could create something extraordinary. The world was wide open and she was ready to embrace it. The years went by quickly, and with each passing day, her journey in the world of music deepened. The decision to pursue her passion had led her to experiences she could have never imagined, and she had grown in ways she didn't even realize at first. The music school, once so intimidating, had become a second home. The professors, who had once seemed distant and unapproachable, were now her mentors and friends. The students, once strangers, were now her companions on the same path. But as her skill as a pianist continued to improve, so did her understanding of herself. She was no longer just a performer who played music to meet expectations. She had become someone who could bring a unique voice to every piece, someone who could stand out without trying to impress anyone. Her music had evolved, and so had she. One of the most significant moments of her growth came during a recital. She had been practicing for weeks for this performance, a challenging piece that tested her ability to express emotion through every note. It wasn't a piece that was designed to show off technical ability or complexity. Instead, it was one that required vulnerability, openness, and a deep connection to the music. The night of the recital arrived, and she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. It was one of the biggest performances of her life so far, and the audience was filled with her professors, classmates, and even a few invited guests. The piece she was about to play was a personal one that she had worked tirelessly on. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about telling a story that only she could tell. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. The moment she had been preparing for had arrived, and all the pressure of her training, her hard work, and her journey had led to this point. The lights dimmed and the audience became still. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and let the music begin. The first notes of the piece filled the room, soft and haunting, like a whisper carried on the wind. She didn't focus on the mechanics of the music. She didn't think about the speed or precision. Instead, she let herself be carried by the music, letting the emotion behind the notes guide her. The melody was simple yet powerful, and as her fingers moved over the keys, she felt a deep sense of connection with the music. For a moment, she lost herself entirely in the performance. It was as if the piano was an extension of her own heart, and every note that came from her fingers was an expression of her deepest thoughts and emotions. She wasn't performing for the audience. She wasn't trying to win their approval. She was simply sharing a piece of herself with them. As the piece progressed, the music began to build. The quiet, somber notes gave way to something more intense, more passionate. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, and the melody took on a new life. The audience could feel it. There was something raw and honest about the way she played. Every note was a testament to the years of struggle, growth, and self-discovery that had brought her to this moment. When the final notes of the piece rang out, the room was silent for a long moment. It felt like time had stopped. And then the applause came, slowly at first, as the audience absorbed the weight of the performance, and then it grew, louder and more enthusiastic. She opened her eyes, surprised by the reaction. She had played from her heart, and it seemed the audience had felt that connection. She stood up, bowing to the applause, but inside she was overwhelmed. This wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about the awards or the accolades. It was about the fact that she had shared a piece of herself with the world, and in doing so, had connected with others in a way she had never imagined possible. After the recital, one of her professors approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You've grown a lot," he said. "That performance wasn't just about playing the notes. It was about living the music. You've found your voice, and it's something beautiful." His words meant more to her than any compliment she had received before. She had finally understood what it meant to connect with the music, to let it become part of who she was. She had spent so long trying to fit into the mold of what a pianist was supposed to be. But now she realized that the greatest performances came from being true to yourself, from allowing your emotions to guide you. Over the next few years, her journey continued. She began to perform more regularly, taking on new challenges and pushing herself further than ever before. Each performance brought something new, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of personal growth. She started to embrace different genres of music, experimenting with various styles and finding new ways to express herself. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. There were times when the pressure of living up to the expectations of others weighed heavily on her. There were nights when she felt like giving up, when the road ahead seemed too difficult to travel. But in those moments, she always returned to the music. It was her anchor, her source of strength. She remembered the simple melody that had started it all, the piece she had played in the competition, and how it had transformed into something greater than she could have imagined. That moment had shown her that the music wasn't just about perfection, it was about honesty, emotion, and connection. One evening, after a particularly tough rehearsal, she sat down at the piano and began to play. She didn't have a specific piece in mind, but as her fingers moved across the keys, a new melody started to emerge. It wasn't like anything she had played before. It was raw, unpolished, and filled with emotion. She played for hours, lost in the music, until the early hours of the morning. The melody was something special, something that felt like a reflection of everything she had experienced. The struggles, the triumphs, the moments of doubt, and the moments of clarity. It was a piece that told her story in all its complexity. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the music still lingering in the air. She knew then that her journey was far from over. She had come so far, but there was still so much to learn, so much to explore. The music was a lifelong journey, one that would continue to evolve as she did. And while there would always be challenges ahead, she now had the confidence to face them head on. The next time she performed that new piece, it was met with a standing ovation. The music had come from a place deep within her, and it had resonated with the audience in a way she hadn't expected. She had finally found her voice, and it was something that no one could take away from her. As she stood on stage, accepting the applause, she realized that the music had given her more than she had ever imagined. It had given her the confidence to be herself, to embrace her journey and to share her story with the world. It had taught her that in the end, the most important thing was not the destination, but the journey itself, and with that, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The years continued to pass, and each day brought new lessons, challenges, and moments of self-discovery. As her reputation as a musician grew, so did the opportunities that came her way. She found herself performing in renowned concert halls, collaborating with talented musicians from all over the world, and experiencing the kind of recognition she had once only dreamed of. But even with all the success, something remained constant: her passion for the music, the way it moved her, and the deep connection it allowed her to feel with others. Yet with this success came new challenges. The pressure to constantly top her previous performances, to continue growing and improving, sometimes felt overwhelming. She had come so far, and it was easy to get lost in the whirlwind of expectations, both from others and herself. There were moments when she felt like she was losing sight of why she had started in the first place: the love for the music itself. The purity of the experience she had had during that first competition, when she played the simple melody with nothing more than passion and belief in the music, was beginning to feel distant. One day, after an exhausting performance, she sat alone in her dressing room, looking at the reflection of herself in the mirror. The smile that greeted her was a familiar one, but it felt different now, more like a mask. She had worked hard to get to where she was, but in doing so, she had let the pressures of success cloud the joy she had once felt in simply playing the music. It was as if the more recognition she gained, the more she lost touch with the pure, childlike excitement she had felt when she first touched the keys. That night, as she lay awake in her hotel room, she thought about her journey, her growth, and the music that had carried her this far. She realized that the key to reclaiming her joy was to go back to where it all began, the simple melody that had started everything. The melody wasn't complex, it didn't require flashy techniques or intricate harmonies, but it was something that spoke to her heart. It wasn't about perfection, it was about authenticity, emotion, and the ability to communicate something beyond the notes. The next morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to take a break from her packed performance schedule and return to the basics. She found a quiet practice room in the back of the concert hall and sat down at the piano. She didn't have a particular piece in mind. Instead, she let her fingers find their way to the keys just as they had all those years ago. The familiar weight of her fingers on the ivory keys brought a sense of calm, as though the piano was a trusted friend. As she began to play, she let the music flow without thinking about technique or impressing anyone. She played slowly at first, letting each note resonate in the room. It wasn't a performance. It was an intimate conversation with the music, with herself. The simple melody from that first competition came to her naturally, but this time it was different. She wasn't trying to recreate the magic of the past. She was embracing the moment as it was, allowing herself to be vulnerable and free with the music. With each passing hour, she felt the weight of her worries begin to lift. The expectations, the judgments, the pressures, they all seemed to fade away. She was reminded of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about achieving perfection or impressing others. It was about feeling something deeply and sharing that feeling with the world. The melody that once seemed so simple now felt like a journey, a reflection of all she had been through, all the moments of doubt, fear, joy, and discovery that had shaped her. By the end of the day, she felt lighter, freer. She realized that she didn't need to chase after the recognition or the accolades. What mattered was the music itself, and the connection she could create through it. The performance didn't need to be flawless, it just needed to be real, honest, and true to who she was as an artist. As she returned to the stage for her next performance, she did so with a renewed sense of confidence and authenticity. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing the music the way it moved her, the way it had always moved her. The audience could feel the difference. The way she played, the way her emotions poured into each note. It was something they had never experienced before. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real, and that's what made her performance unforgettable. The standing ovation that followed was not for technical prowess, but for the emotional depth she had brought to the performance. She stood there taking in the applause, but this time the recognition didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a celebration of the journey she had taken, a journey that had led her back to the heart of the music. In the years that followed, her career continued to flourish, but she no longer felt the same pressure to constantly prove herself. She played for herself now, for the joy of the music and for the connection it created with those who listened. The simple melody from that first competition had evolved along with her, and it had become a reminder of the importance of staying true to herself. She began to mentor young pianists, sharing with them the lessons she had learned. The music was not about perfection. It was about expression, about the emotions it could evoke and the way it could connect people in ways words never could. She taught them to embrace the music, to let it speak for itself, and to never lose sight of the passion that had brought them to the piano in the first place. One day, as she sat in front of a young student, she watched them play a simple melody with such care and authenticity that it brought tears to her eyes. She realized that the journey she had taken wasn't just her own. It was a shared experience, one that she could pass on to others. The music would always be there, waiting to be discovered, to be expressed, to be lived. And as long as she could continue sharing that gift, she knew her journey would never truly end. As the years passed, she continued to perform, to teach, and to live her life with the music at her side. The simple melody that had changed everything remained with her, a constant reminder of the power of vulnerability, authenticity, and the deep connection that music could create. And she knew with certainty that she had found her true calling, not as a performer striving for perfection, but as an artist who shared her heart with the world, one note at a time. As the years passed, she found herself at the crossroads of both personal and professional growth. The momentum from her earlier successes continued to carry her forward, but as the journey unfolded, she was faced with new decisions and challenges. The world of music had always been her passion, but now it was starting to feel more like a profession. The weight of performing on the biggest stages in the world and constantly being in the public eye brought its own set of pressures. It was easy to fall into the trap of trying to live up to external expectations, rather than remembering why she started playing music in the first place. But despite the fame and accolades, something within her began to stir. The long, exhausting tours, the countless rehearsals, the endless expectations, it started to feel like something was missing. She could no longer ignore the growing sense of restlessness that had taken root in her heart. Was this all there was to it? Was her entire existence to be defined by how well she played for an audience? She had come so far, but the joy she had once felt from simply playing music seemed distant now, buried beneath the pressure of maintaining her career. It wasn't that the music had lost its magic. In fact, it still moved her deeply, still filled her with a sense of wonder and joy every time her fingers touched the keys. But the act of performing for others, of constantly living up to expectations, began to feel like an act of survival rather than a celebration. She had lost sight of why she had started playing in the first place. One night, after another grueling performance in a beautiful but unfamiliar city, she returned to her hotel room feeling exhausted. The moment she closed the door behind her, a wave of emptiness washed over her. She had just played for an audience that adored her, but somehow it didn't feel as fulfilling as it used to. There was no sense of deep connection, no sense of the profound joy that once filled her heart. Sitting by the window, looking out at the city below, she realized that she had been running away from something. She had been so focused on the next concert, the next performance, the next accolade, that she had lost touch with the simple pleasures of playing. She had stopped playing for herself for the joy of the music. Instead, she had become a performer, driven by external validation, playing for others rather than from her heart. In that quiet moment, she made a decision. She would step away from the spotlight, from the grueling tours, and take some time for herself. It was a terrifying thought at first. The pressure of stepping away, of taking a break when the world expected more from her, weighed heavily on her. But deep down she knew it was the only way she could reconnect with the essence of the music, to rediscover the pure joy of playing without the fear of judgment. She took a break from the stage, allowing herself the space and time she needed to heal and reflect. She returned to the quiet comfort of her hometown, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the place that had shaped her. The peaceful rhythm of everyday life began to soothe her soul, and she found herself rediscovering the joy of playing for the sake of playing. It wasn't about impressing anyone or living up to expectations. It was just her and the music. During this time, she also began to explore new aspects of her musicality. She found herself drawn to the raw, untamed sounds of improvisation. She had always been a perfectionist, focused on flawless execution and precise interpretations. But now she allowed herself to let go of control. She started to experiment, to play without any set plan, letting the music lead her wherever it wanted to go. In these moments, she found a freedom she had never experienced before. The music no longer felt like something she had to control. It was something she could flow with, something that spoke directly from her heart. One afternoon, while sitting in a quiet park, she picked up her notebook and began to write. She had always kept a journal, but now her entries were filled with thoughts about the music, about what it meant to her, about what it meant to be truly free in her art. The words flowed effortlessly onto the pages, as if the music had opened up a channel within her mind. For the first time in years, she felt at peace with herself and with her music. As she spent more time away from the stage, she also began to reconnect with her family and friends. They had always been there for her, but the demands of her career had pulled her away from them. Now she had the time to simply enjoy their company, to laugh and share moments of everyday life that she had missed so much. She realized that music was just one part of her life, and that there were many other ways to find joy and fulfillment outside of the stage. The months passed, and she found herself growing stronger, both personally and professionally. The time away from the pressure of performing had allowed her to rediscover the pure joy of music and reminded her of the importance of balance in life. She was no longer just a musician. She was a person with many facets, with interests, relationships, and passions beyond her career. She began to consider how she could return to performing on her own terms. The experiences she had had during her time away had changed her. She no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. She wasn't interested in the accolades or the praise. What mattered now was the connection she could create with her audience. She wanted to perform for the love of the music, not for the applause. Her return to the stage was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't about dazzling the audience with her technique or showing off how much she had accomplished. Instead, it was about sharing the music, letting it speak for itself. She performed small, intimate concerts, often in places that were less about the grandeur of the venue and more about the tie-in between her and the listeners. And in these moments, she felt something deep and profound. She felt at home. Her performances were more spontaneous now, more alive with the spirit of improvisation. She took risks in her playing, trusting her intuition more than ever before. And each time she performed, she felt a sense of freedom and joy that had eluded her for years. The music had become her ally once again, not something she had to conquer, but something she had to live with, to share, and to explore. Her audience responded in kind. They weren't just hearing music, they were feeling it. The energy in the room was different now. There was a depth to the experience, a sense of shared emotion that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just performing for them. She was inviting them to experience the music with her. As the years went on, she continued to perform, but it was clear that she had found something more valuable than any award or recognition. She had found peace with herself and with the music. She had rediscovered the true meaning of being an artist, not by meeting the expectations of others, but by following her heart, her intuition, and her love for the art itself. And in that quiet moment, she knew that her journey had come full circle. From the nervous pianist who had played a simple melody, to the artist who now performed with freedom and authenticity, she had grown in ways she never imagined. The music had always been there, guiding her, shaping her, and showing her the path forward. She knew that this was just the beginning of another chapter in her life, a chapter where the music would continue to evolve, and she would continue to grow along with it. In the end, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, the moments of connection, the shared experiences, and the joy of creating something meaningful together. And as long as she could continue to share that gift with the world, she knew she had found her true calling.